this edition of World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster Tarpley, speaking from Washington, D.C. It's again one of those late afternoons, and we're approaching the middle of winter. And, of course, the federal government, your federal government, is shut down thanks to the scam by Don the Con. And our motto for 2019 is that Don the Con will soon be gone, in the sense of either indicted or impeached or put under the yoke of the 25th Amendment. Those are the various possibilities. This is really the only serious political topic that is going on. And right now, you can expect for the next month, we're going to be working towards the Michael Cohen testimony, currently scheduled to occur on the 7th of February. And that's going to be a big day. That is going to be a media circus. That is going to be comparable in magnitude to the John Dean testimony in the late spring and early summer of 1973 that blew the lid off the Watergate scandal. It's going to be similar, although I think with the signs reversed, to the Oliver North testimony in 1987 at the Joint Congressional Committee. It is going to be one of those landmark moments, and you want to plan it so you can watch some of it that day. I think it's maybe one day, it might be more, but one day I think is the general idea, and that means a very serious problem. It is, of course, you have to remember, it is a very big event. It is a turning point. This is the first insider, in other words, the first eyewitness who can give you eyewitness, first-person accounts of what Trump said, what he did, how he looked, whatever else he might have been talking about at the time, and on and on. And it was all of that detail which makes it so compelling. It is the way that you accredit a narrative, especially, of course, in the eyes of a gullible audience. But this is going to be true, so gullibility will lie in the beholder, and not deception in the intent of the person telling the story. So it may not produce all kinds of new stories, although I rather think it will. So that's now the perspective. We've got a 1 month build-up, and whatever else happens, that clock is going to be ticking in the background. And we will have a lot to say here, of course, about the question of Russiagate, Trumpgate, collusion, obstruction of justice, and more. And we, as we'll try to tell you, we've got an example of what looks like prima facie collusion this week. That is to say, the imperfectly or improperly formatted document submitted by the Manafort lawyers to one of the federal courts here in D.C., and that document revealed, apparently according to the first account, was that Manafort had been hobnobbing. He had gone over to Europe, I think to Madrid was the first version. He'd gone to Madrid to talk to his old friend Kilimnik, actually his business associate, and that in that conversation, detailed data, electronic data about social media subscribers and other questions, the kind of thing that would be useful in targeting fake media assaults, that was transferred from Manafort to Kilimnik, who then presumably took it back to Russia. So, you see, that's a big deal, because that would be then, again, prima facie evidence of collusion. if some Republican blowhard, bully, with his treason fairly showing on his sleeve, if they start this routine again, oh, there's not a shred of evidence of collusion. Well, how about that passage in the federal court filing by Manafort's lawyers, which indicates what looks to the average observer as something, if not collusion, then so close to it that the distinction is impossible to draw. So all of that is going on. The crisis of the regime behind the scenes is in some ways the motor force for everything else. In other words, if we have a shutdown, why do we have a shutdown? Well, it's to maintain the cohesion of his backward base, of his gullible and duped set of individuals. Why is that in danger? Well, because he needs the 33% to try to hold a final bulwark in the Senate. When impeachment occurs, that will then go to the Senate, most likely, and then you've got to make sure that the conviction side and removal side doesn't get the two-thirds majority called for by the Constitution. So everything revolves around that. It doesn't matter how small it is. Once you're in the presidency, you can stay there with 1/3 plus 1 of the Senate. And that's the strategy. It has been for quite a while, since they gave up on the House, maybe a year ago. And therefore, it has a causal relationship to everything that this regime does. But first, let's just set the stage before we go any further. Going back to one of our great American poets, Robert Frost. Some may still remember Robert Frost appearing at the inauguration of John F. Kennedy in 1961 in a sunny, snowy day in Washington, D.C. And let's just remind you of one of his most famous works, which seems to be a polemic written with the current situation in mind, right? This is the famous Mending Wall, and it's not about mending walls. It's about condemning walls, right? Poetry is a little bit complicated, right? There are such things as irony, indirection, where you seem to have a surface meaning, but the real meaning is not the same as the surface meaning. I know that's an outrageous concept from the point of view of many a Trump backer. But I'll just give you a couple of samples. It's about 40 lines. It was written slightly before World War I and published in 1914, so at the beginning of the cataclysmic crisis of the 20th century. I think at this time Robert Frost was living in southern New Hampshire, and he published this in Boston, and one of his later anthologies is called North of Boston, right? To many, Boston is already pretty far north, but in New England it's not. There's the whole north of Boston. So here's the way it goes, and bear this in mind for advice. I shared this already on the daily program, but it's so suitable that I think we want to give it another airing. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it, and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on stone, but yet they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. And we'll continue with our retrospective on Robert Frost and the question of walls in just a minute. To World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley, PhD, here in Washington, D.C. Don has now tied the longest government shutdown today, and if, as is virtually impossible or virtually guaranteed as a physical event, if this shutdown continues into tomorrow, then Don will become the champion of shutdowns, the biggest anarchist in the entire Republican right-wing anarchist gang. And I'm sure he'll be very suitably edified by that. As a matter of fact, you can make an argument to Trump. Here, Don, why don't you drop this now? You're the champion. What more do you need, right? You've outdone anybody. You've outdone the Tea Party. You've outdone Newt Gingrich. You've outdone every Republican bandit and thug in the lot. And, well, you might as well enjoy it. But we were back there with Robert Frost. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. The gaps, I mean. No one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time, we find them there. So the setup is we're in southern New Hampshire, not that far from the Massachusetts line, and he has a yearly appointment with his next-door neighbor, the guy with the farm next to his, and they walk along the boundary between the two plots of land and try to maintain this wall, which is simply a pile of stones. It's not masonry or anything. It's not held together by anything. And what you're going to see is the idea that there's an elemental force of nature that rebels against this artificial demarcation. And, of course, the artificial demarcation is what Don is all about. So let's just follow this up. It's the stones, right, the boulders, or small boulders, whatever they are, that come crashing down have to be replaced in some cases, right? It's the well-known phenomenon of the frost heave. This is what makes potholes. This is what attacks concrete and so forth. So the guy who's narrating this is really says there's no purpose to this wall, right? Why do we need the wall? We don't need the wall. He has pine trees. I have apple orchards. My apple trees are never going to offend his pine cones. And I tell him that. And the neighbor only says, good fences make good neighbors. Now, good fences make good neighbors is not the conclusion endorsed by Robert Frost. What he's trying to convey is that the neighbor is a cretin who simply repeats proverbs the way any benighted peasant would. Anyway, the neighbor says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is mischief in me. And I wonder if I could put a notion in his head, make him think, why do they make good neighbors? Well, the guy is impervious, right? He can't think. He's got a closed mind. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him. I'd blame the elves. But it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. And I see him there bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. The neighbor is compared to an old stone savage armed. In other words, the Paleolithic caveman, a savage holding these two oblong stones, rocks. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me. In other words, he is a benighted individual, mentally, morally. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me. Not of woods only, and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, the proverb that they've all heard, and he likes having thought of it so well, he says it again. Good fences make good neighbors. The entire burden of the poem is that this is not the point, that good fences do not make good neighbors. And we've been sampling, let's just sample one other, in terms of the literary reflections of walls and how they are ambivalent or opposed, right? We just have to cite Pope Francis, right? Pope Francis says, If you're concerned with building walls and not with building bridges, you're not a Christian. Put that in your pipe and smoke it out there. The hypocrites and holy rollers, right, who do not demonstrate charity in practice, which is where it's got to be demonstrated. But, of course, we have the famous Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare, where the character of a wall, in other words, an actor who impersonates a wall, usually with the appropriate, it's like having a sandwich sign made into bricks or something like this. This is a key part, right? So there's actually a character, a speaking part, dramatis personae, and one of them is a wall. Maybe he doesn't speak, but he gesticulates, right? That's for sure. He makes signs. So it's the story of Pyramus and Thisbe. They are neighbors, but there's a wall between the properties, and they can only communicate through chinks in the wall. So Theseus. Theseus is looking for his girlfriend, and Thisbe doesn't find her, and he's looking through a hole in the wall, and then he's disappointed that he doesn't find what he wants. So he's expecting the wall to give him a revelation, to show him something that he can't see, and he says, "Oh, thank you, wall," and he looks through. And he says, "But what's this I see? I don't see any Thisbe. Oh, wicked wall, through which I don't see any happiness. Damn thy stones for disappointing me like this." Now that's the modernized. Let's go back to the original. "But what see I? No Thisbe do I see. Oh, wicked wall, through whom I see no bliss. Cursed be thy stones for thus deceiving me." Okay? And it goes on from there, right? You can go into, any number of references. But we wanted to put this first because Robert Frost qualifies as a New England sage. And these are valuable people. Good to have around. Yeah, you want to hear what they say. So there it is. The wall. And the wall, mending the wall is not the answer. It's to go beyond the need for a wall. And we'll be back in a minute here on Come Back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So you do get the idea. So we're now in the middle of the 20th day. Once this day is over, this Friday when we're recording, that will make it the second longest. And then by the end of tomorrow, Saturday, that will be already 22 days, and that will be an all-time record. This Friday, the 11th, today, as we're speaking, this is a turning point. This is a watershed. This is a payday with no paycheck. And we have to realize that for those of us who follow this stuff day by day, hour by hour, we've been following all of the Mueller, Russiagate, Stormy, the Playmate, Cohen, and all this other stuff. This is recondite. It's complicated for the average person. They don't have the time. It's all in legal jargon. And try as you will, it's hard to follow every detail. So what we therefore see are a series of events that anybody can understand. We have all of these federal workers. They're not wealthy. They're working people. They need to get paid. They are diligent workers. A lot of them have ideas of public service, and they are being scorned. They are being treated like dirt by this decadent billionaire, so-called, at least multi-millionaire, I suppose, we'll have to grant him. That really is not saying too much. A multi-millionaire who has a complete contempt for working people, whose main goal is to be accepted socially by the Davos group. And, of course, he's not going to be able to go to Davos, the poor dear. I'm sure that will put him in a bad mood for the entire rest of the weekend, and we can expect all kinds of laments, right, all centered on self-pity, me, not the plight of a Guatemalan refugee, not the plight of a TSA worker on 30 or 40,000 a year, but all about the atrocious injustice of the world vis-a-vis Donald J. Trump. Me. Hey, if you're not a victim in today's world, you're nobody. So I think what's happening now is Trump's credentials of caring are being wiped out. The idea that he could plausibly argue, hey, I'm a populist, I'm an outsider, I care what happens to the working man. Well, what about this? And, of course, in his stupidity, in his lack of demagogical skills, right, his pathetic ineptitude in carrying these things out, he already took responsibility. And I would call this to the attention of the various TV anchormen. Hey, anchor people, stop talking about this from your usual idiotic perch of bipartisanship or equidistance or neutrality. Trump has, in an almost ceremonial way, as if it were a law of the Medes and the Persians, or Trump speaking ex cathedra, making a pronouncement on issues of faith and morals, says, I'm taking responsibility for the government shutdown. I will own it. I won't blame you. And, of course, that didn't last too long. But it's all on jelly, as they say. So you can convince yourself about the war guilt in this situation simply by taking a quick look. Now, what's the overtone? We're at a point in world history where the populist or fascisto-populist tide of 2015, 2016 has reached its maximum. The damage is considerable, but not fatal and not irreparable. And what we're seeing now is on the two sides of the Atlantic. Here in the U.S., we're approaching emergency rule. We're approaching a state of siege, a state of war, if you like, where parliamentary procedures, the normal course of legality specified by the written U.S. Constitution, as well as by the unwritten and therefore harder to cite British one, right? The question of supply. I mean, does the government have money to do what it has to do? These are approaching a breakdown crisis at the same moment. So in Washington and in London, we've got two governments that are now close to a breakdown of normal parliamentary forms and the need to declare a state of emergency, to rule by decree, by executive order, by, what do the British have? Orders in council. I don't know what they call it anymore, but emergency rule. Does that mean that habeas corpus will be suspended? And President Lincoln had to suspend habeas corpus in all of the United States in theory and in the Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. corridor in practice. They had to start arresting people who were Confederate agitators and possible saboteurs of that critical railroad, because the entire fate of the world depended on that Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. railroad. So Lincoln was very right to do that. He had, in short, a real emergency. As we can see with Trump, Trump thinks that the definition of an emergency is when he can't get what he wants and doesn't see any way of obtaining it. And he is obviously panicked. He feels that and all these puns about walls, right? The walls are coming in on him, right? That would be Edgar Allan Poe, The Pit and the Pendulum at the very end, right? Where the walls come in and he's about to go into the pit until the French general pulls him up and saves him from this horrible fate. So there we are. Trump is scared. He's panicked. He wants to have this gesture. He feels that he's invested a lot in it. And he basically says, let the heavens crash down as long as I get what they want. But, of course, what he wants in constitutional law, that's not enough. It can't be that a state of emergency is because you didn't get a majority for some bill that you wanted. So that is absolutely ridiculous. As a matter of fact, the more cynical Republicans build that into their scenario. They say, Trump, you don't have to get the wall. All you have to do is show these dupes out there, give them the impression you're fighting for them. You fight, fight, fight. You declare a state of emergency. That is immediately rolled back by the courts. And after that, it'll take months, years, and you can say, well, I did everything I could. I did everything humanly possible, and we're just waiting for those bad judges. So blame the judges, blame the Democrats, blame everybody, and, of course, you're never responsible. He even said that was this week. He was asked, we have these recordings from Nixon, from Truman, from Obama, from Gerald Ford. They all say, the buck stops here with me. The buck stops with the president. Trump was asked, and absolutely true to form, he said, the buck stops with everybody, not me. He's just he's a bystander when he wants to be. He's all-powerful dictator, but then when he wants to be, he's simply a bystander. So what I urge everybody to think of here is look beyond, if you can, the immediate stakes. The immediate stakes, God knows, are serious enough, right? You've got almost 1 million federal workers, 380,000 have been laid off, furloughed, no work, no pay, not ever. And unless special laws are drawn up, then you've got the other 480,000 who are working but not getting paid. There's an estimate of 4 million contractors who are not working and who also will probably never get paid. It's time for the Democratic Congress to show that these people have to get paid. And we'll be back here. Back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. on the eve of some snow in the nation's capital. Winter is here, and the winter of the Trump regime is, of course, upon us. Now, we want you to keep up with everything day to day. This is one part of it. The broadcast here, World Crisis Radio, that typically is available on Saturday afternoons. But Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we've got a parallel program that is called The American System. Yes, we follow Alexander Hamilton. We follow Lincoln, Henry Clay, and many others. That's the most successful form of economics the world has ever known. The New Deal is part of that same tradition. So we don't need and we do not accept the notion of democratic socialism as mouthed by some very naive new arrivals. But we propose the American system. We look at the world from this point of view. So go to AmericanSystem.tv, please, AmericanSystem.tv, and there you can join the podcast, sign up, and listen to it every day, typically available about 9 p.m., and yours truly, joined by Daniela Walls from the nation's capital. What's going on? What does it mean? And what should you do? Now, today, what we're seeing is after 3 weeks of failure, the Republican Party cannot govern. This started under a government completely controlled by the Republicans. Now they've lost control of one house of Congress, thank God. But it simply shows that the Republican Party cannot be a party of government. It's structurally incapable. There is that Tea Party caucus that will never vote to fund civilization and government here in the United States. They're enemies of government, enemies of civilization. They are anarchists and barbarians, savages. That's the Tea Party. So that's clearly their program. So you can't vote for that. It's just impossible. It's not compatible with with the survival of the country. So the Republicans, all of them, including the liberal Republicans, because they have practiced this stuff year after year. Remember that Trump is only the concentrated venom of the Republican Party over a decade or two. This party deserves destruction. It needs to become extinct. The country, the nation, requires that the Republican Party disappear rapidly, with all deliberate speed. And that would mean that it shared the fate of the Federalists in the 1820s. In the early 1850s, it was the disappearance of the Whigs. And in the middle to end of the 1850s, it was the Know-Nothings. And this current crop has many comparisons with the Know-Nothings, but also with the others, right? It's plutocrats practicing xenophobia in order to dupe people who prefer hatred to their own interests. Now, the Trump regime is in big trouble. Probably the biggest thing right now, although it is imperfectly understood and we're only beginning to grasp where it might go. The Fitch rating agency, bond rating agency, has now issued what amounts to a warning to the U.S. government that the current combination of deficit spending, tax cuts for the rich, or indeed for anybody from these guys' point of view, and on top of that, the closing of the government, that this does not add up to a AAA rating. It's not AAA anymore, says Fitch, and if you don't reverse this, if this goes on for some weeks and months longer and begins to develop complications, then you will be downgraded. Downgraded. Remember the humiliation of Obama when the Standard & Poor's downgraded U.S. Treasury securities back during the crisis of 2010, 2011. You'll remember this. This was the time of the Satan sandwich emerged in response to this situation. And in addition to that, it was the fiscal cliff. It was the danger of, default, because that's the issue. And by the way, we are not exempt from that. Sometime during March, the U.S. government will lose borrowing authority, and they may keep going for a couple of months beyond that. But in addition to this terrible situation we have now, with the government shutdown over the fit of pique, the temper tantrum, that is going to be compromised. It's going to be multiplied, pyramided by a series of events around the insolvency, right, national bankruptcy of the United States. And we'll approach all of that in detail. But Fitch has now issued the warning. So what does that mean? The international finance capital set, right, the zombie bankers and hedge fund hyenas of the world, especially Europe, they are now signaling that Trump's antics are not amusing. They are not amused because this, naturally, the instability of the U.S. Treasury market would essentially open up a period of all-out chaos in world financial markets. Who would benefit? Yeah, Russia would benefit. Russia could say, we'll pay you in oil. And people will say, yeah, well, we like that better. And, of course, the Chinese, who want to destroy the existing world monetary system so that they can come in with their own totalitarian, dictatorial, oriental, despotic world monetary system, or won't even be world. It'll be a debt trap for the world. And the upshot of the debt trap is that you're in hock to the Emperor Xi, who must be obeyed for all of your born days. So that's that situation. It's no good. Now, the finance front is looking bad. The U.S. banks just had a terrible quarter at the end of 2018. Goldman Sachs took a tremendous beating. They're sort of identified with the regime, so that's not encouraging. And right now, if we look at the Congress, just at the end of this week in the House, Pelosi brought forward her funding bills. They all passed. They were all sent once again to the Senate, where they are being ignored, right? If Mitch wants to put an end to this, get back to normalcy, get back to regular order, hey, Mitch? All you got to do is take those House bills, put them on the floor, and let the Senate vote. Let the Senate work its will, as they say. But he didn't want to do that because it would pass. So in the House, we got up to 12 Republican defections. 12. Now, we were hoping for more. We were hoping for anywhere between 24 to 36. But you're dealing with Republicans. They are naturally slow. They are not very bright. They have, some of them have cognitive problems. You know what we mean. So even with these dullards, with these dunces of the Republican Party, they've already got 12 defections, and that has been going up during the week, right? It went up from 7 to 8 to 12. It started with Treasury 8, Agriculture 11, and then Department of Transportation 12. And there's a lot of explaining to do for congressmen who didn't vote for things that they need. For example, we had a demonstration out in Nevada at the Internal Revenue Service Center where they were all protesting, right? In one of the most reactionary states. There they were, protesting. And in the Senate, we have 4. We'll get back to that in just a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, our second hour here. We're recording on the afternoon of Friday, January 11th, 2019. We're in the 20th day of the government shutdown. And we are, in addition, this is now the 722nd day of the Don regime. And if you're listening on Saturday, that will be day 723. Of the Don regime. And the countdown clock is working towards the February 7th public televised testimony of the fixer. Il consigliere Michael Cohen is going to apparently spill the beans on Don in front of the House Government Oversight Committee. This is by invitation, not even by subpoena. This is the veteran and the heroic Elijah Cummings of Maryland who is giving him this platform. So, as we were saying, Trump is in big trouble. He's panicking. His legal line of defense is gone. We've now got this clown, Giuliani, saying, we're done with Mueller. We're not going to do anything more for Mueller. We gave him everything. That's it. Finish. No more dialogue, no more answers, no more questions, no more negotiations. Well, you could say Trump was smart. He got a year of surcease out of this, but maybe not so smart because that year of surcease was not Mueller and his group sitting around the office and playing tiddlywinks. It was them building a case which is going to, in our estimation, bring down this regime. So as we were saying, in the House of Representatives, the Republican defections have gotten up to 12 on one of these bills. And on the Senate side, there, of course, they're not allowed to vote because Mitch has... he has chosen the path of the political eunuch. He is not engaged. He's not doing anything. And they don't get to vote. So they're free to say what they would. They say, well, if I could vote, of course, I would do this, that, and the other thing. So the 4 defections we seem to have so far are Collins of Maine, Murkowski of Alaska, we've got Cory Gardner of Colorado, and we've got Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia. And a judicious observer pointed out, hey, in West Virginia, There are a lot of people who need those food stamps. They need them. So you can expect that to loom large in some of these poorer states. So that's the Congress. We've got the financiers not happy. We've got various Democratic potential presidential candidates, especially the ones from outside of Washington, are being politely received and politely heard in Wall Street. That's got to scare Don, because that's his love-hate relationship, right? He wants to be a part of it, and he resents the fact that he's not already a part of it, right? He wanted to go to Davos to symbolize that fact again, but he won't get to go unless he decides to cave. We urge him to cave already, and go to Davos. Make it your farewell tour, right? Your swan song before the assembled finance oligarchs of Davos, the Davoisie, as it's sometimes known. So how about the money people? Well, the mega donors, right? Part of it we've just said. They're already looking around, right? They've got a roving eye. Those multi-billionaire mega donors are not happy. Trump has tanked the stock market. They still don't see where the ill-planned, ill-executed, bungled anti-China campaign is supposed to lead. They don't know. So that's already then a problem. And then the media, right? Last Sunday, Chris Wallace embarrassed Hucksterby Slanders by saying, I knew you were going to cite this statistic, and I looked it up, and the version you're telling is not accurate. Right? False? A lie? Well, that's the idea. We've also had a couple of unheard of events this week when the commentators on Fox and Friends in the morning deviated completely from the Trump line. They were practicing revisionism, anti-Trump revisionism. And if you ever go over and look at Fox Business Channel, which is interesting to do in these times of parlous instability on Wall Street, right? You want to get their take. Well, then that turns out to be Neil Cavuto daring to criticize the master, right? That his strategy is bad, that it's not working, and so forth. Now, today, the stock market was down by the tiniest fraction, 6 points on the Dow, a third of a point on the S&P, 15 points on the NASDAQ. The VIX is now calming down. It went down to 1815. Just remember that these are bear market rallies, dear friends, right? These are built on short covering. It was a period that's basically a short covering rally this past week, 5 days, 5 up days, that led to, it was predicated on short covering. The PPT, Plunge Protection Team, comes in and does what it can. And there were also technical factors connected to the end of the previous year. So the fact that this has stocks have gone up 2% for this week, well, that's a typical bear market rally. But bear market, it remains. And the kind of instability we're talking about now is what Fitch was threatening, right? The downgrading of the U.S. public debt, the downgrading of the one reliable thing of a large scale in this world, which is the U.S. Treasury securities market. And, that's what Trump is putting into danger. And they say, Trump, that's your racket, right? Demagoguery is your racket, but making money is our racket, and you're rocking the boat, right? You're muscling in on our racket, and you're ruining it for us. And then along with them goes Fox Media, right, with the examples we said. The word is that Rupert Murdoch is having his doubts about Trump. What's his viability? What's it going to look like? Does he want to see his wonderful creation, this monstrosity, we would say, Fox News Channel, Fox Business Channel, Fox Broadcast Network in localities, all of that going to go down just because of Trump's political ineptitude, the fact that he's a loser and a bungler, and so forth? Well, Rupert Murdoch is not in that business. He wants to save his main assets. So that essentially sets the stage for the crisis of the Trump regime. He has no visible means of support. The other thing, of course, with Trump is the megalomania is getting hard to take, right? It's boring. Trump, of course, always poses as the know-it-all, right? The expert in everything. I was trying to think who in history ever went this far. Obviously, various leaders have wanted to appear as geniuses. We could think of so many. The one that I think makes a mockery of the whole thing is Giovanni Pico della Mirandola back in Florence at the end of the Renaissance in the early 1500s, when he said that he was going to propound all of human knowledge in 1,000 theses. Pico della Mirandola, the know-it-all. So this is now Trump. He's the know-it-all. He's the expert in everything. So we'll be back in just a minute on this. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So here we are Friday afternoon. The Air Traffic Controllers Union, representing 25,000 air traffic controllers, are suing Trump because he has demanded, in effect, that they work for no pay. That is illegal. They are being denied due process. So that will then be yet another legal front. We're told by the Washington Post that Trump has hired 17 lawyers, 17 attorneys. That's totally inadequate. We're now going to have multiple lawsuits. We've got multiple Eastern District of Virginia, multiple Mueller. We've got multiple coming soon. We've got multiple the Southern District of New York, Eastern District in Brooklyn. We've got the New York Attorney General, the New York Tax Authority, the New Jersey Attorney General looking into those terrible frauds and abuses at the Bedminster Golf Club. We've got Maryland and D.C. attacking on the emoluments front. And now we'll have the air traffic controllers. We've got Summer Zervos. We've got a panoply. And again, this is what Nixon had. He had a similar array of multiple fronts, right? So the more fronts, the more lawyers you need. And the goal of the 17 lawyers, though, is widely assumed to be a kind of desperate last-ditch assertion of executive privilege, which, based on the precedents of 1974, Nixon's attempt to not turn over the tapes based on executive privilege, and add to that the attempt by Reagan in the Iran-Contra scandal to not turn over documents demanded by the special prosecutor Lawrence Walsh, that illustrious graduate of Flushing High School. So it's thought that this is a desperation mission for the lawyers that are being fed into this meat grinder. And their goal, of course, to deep six the Mueller report. Deep six. That was, of course, the destruction of the contents of a safe full of evidence by, I believe, Patrick Gray, Nixon's hand-picked stooge at the FBI, who deep sixed all of this information or arranged for it to be done. So here we are. Just in terms of also economics, now the New York Federal Reserve, the main one, says the gross domestic product will rise still, that's already a lot, rise in the first quarter of 2019 by 2.1%. But don't forget, we have none other than Hassett, the resident economics guru of the White House, at least in the theory. he has said that for every 2 weeks of government shutdown, you lose 0.1% shaved off your gross domestic product. So we've now had 3 weeks. That would be 0.15% shaved off whatever the otherwise the GDP rate would have been. And in another week, that will then become 0.2%, and that begins to really weigh, and you begin to see all of these different areas. If the shutdown continues, we're going to have, if it goes all the way until it's simply the theoretical maximum of losses on each of these agency fronts, 38 million low-income Americans will lose food stamps, and that's not just West Virginia, but a lot of others. 6 million tax refunds will be anybody's guess. When, if, who knows? Rental assistance paid by Housing and Urban Development for 2 million families, well, may not be there. You may get evicted. In states like Virginia, very easy to get evicted, right? New York State, such places, much harder. 800,000 federal employees with no paychecks. Remember the 4 million contractors who get nothing. Parks and museums shut down. No Smithsonian Air and Space. No National Zoo. No military parks. Airports, the TSA, people in desperation, moonlighting, having to call in, getting sick, and therefore airports possibly coming to the point of breakdown. Federal court system has been triaging cases, but they're going to be slowed to essentially a snail's pace. Disaster relief money doesn't get to the areas that need it, right? The hurricane zones, the California fire zones. The Food and Drug Administration inspections. Remember things like romaine lettuce. Remember all the tremendous archipelago of E. coli. Well, that's back in play. Environmental Protection Agency regulations also falling into desuetude, not being enforced. If you want to have an IPO, an initial public offering, that has been brought to a standstill at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the stock market eventually will begin to obey the laws of gravity once again. We are confident. So all of that is a reason to get out of this. Now, instead, Trump is insisting on ruling by decree. And once again, how ironic that in France, we had Macron a couple of weeks ago saying if these yellow vests go nuts, we may invoke the state of emergency, which is easy to do under the French system. They'd already done it for terrorism after the 2015 Paris attacks. A couple of hundred dead. They could easily go to emergency rule. Same thing in Britain. Let's just mention a few things about Britain. The Parliament came back after Christmas vacation. Theresa May has been forced to accept defeat on a couple of important votes. These were amendments that the House of Commons wanted to pass, and they are generally, they start from this presupposition that next week there will be the final vote of the House of Commons, the lower house of the British Parliament, but the main house of the British Parliament, where May will have to submit her, I think, same plan that she had to delay last month. The Brexit plan, it's going to be defeated. The only question is how much. Will it be bad or will it be catastrophic? And the two amendments that we'll mention now in just a minute when we come back, these have to do with boxing her in for the final phase, right? The end game, once her plan is defeated, what's she going to do? Stall until chaos ensues? That's her plan, too. These reactionaries, they're the same all over. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley, Ph.D. here in Washington, D.C., as we expect the snow sky to begin assembling its dense clouds. over the nation's capital. So what we're looking at is Brexit. The British Parliament is back, and the debacle, the insane leap into the abyss, inspired by fascisto-populism there too, in that idiotic referendum, right, which crept up on the average person. They were sold a bill of goods. It's like to say you have to buy a car sight unseen, right? It's a deal that only a mother would love on payday in the dark. That's the Brexit plan. So here's what it was. May was defeated twice. These are practically twin votes of no confidence in May. This week, now ending, May was defeated twice in the Commons. She can't get her Brexit plan passed, but she's trying to reduce the margin. Gambling. One amendment, which was passed, it limits her ability to stall if she loses the vote next week. It requires her to come up with Plan B within 3 working days of that expected defeat, which would be Monday. So the idea being that what she wants to do is stall. In other words, eat up the clock, waste time, muddy the waters until she says, oh, Brexit, the final day is tomorrow. Too late, gang. We've got to do no-deal Brexit. We've got to leap into the abyss. And all of you take it on the chin with killer austerity, killer cuts, not enough food, not enough medicine. We don't care. We want to be the bankers for China, because that's what it is. When you look at the sinister qualities of this, even the British would be hard put, the British elite, the British ruling class, right? They would be hard-pressed to come up with something this evil. But with the help of the monsters of Beijing, they can do it. Right? So this is the typical perfide Albion plus Oriental despotism at work. So she wants to stall. They're not going to let her stall. There's the other problem is, of course, she has no plan B except to try to stall even more. So what are they going to do? This legislation against May has been fast-tracked through the Commons. The London tabloids that cater to the lunatic fringe, right, the paranoid set, call the current Speaker of the House of Commons the Speaker of the Devil. Speak of the devil. He's the Speaker of the Devil. The Daily Mail says he's an egotistical, preening popinjay, and what have you, all kinds of accusations flying. May cannot dodge the vote on her Brexit plan next week. It will be defeated. We hope it's going to be an overwhelming, catastrophic defeat, and at that point then more maneuvering. The key to this whole situation is really the feckless and reprehensible Jeremy Corbyn, the big talker, right? The big leftist on all sorts of subsidiary matters. But this one, where the fate of the country is at stake, he's worse than useless. He's not going to come out against it. All Jeremy Corbyn can see is he wants to have a general election, which he wants to win, and then he gets to be prime minister. That's the alpha and omega of his wisdom. He wants a general election, but he can't force it through. He didn't even have the guts to say, I propose a vote of no confidence in the May government. It was only going to be May as an individual, and it was ignored. So he looks pretty pathetic coming out of the Christmas vacation. We had, once again, voice of reason, Shinzo Abe of Japan. We heard him at the time of the Buenos Aires summit, G20, before Christmas. Abe is now visiting Britain, and he says, we, Japan, truly hope that a no-deal Brexit will be avoided. Well, it happens that May's only policy is really a no-deal Brexit. Chaos, austerity. And in certain ways, the austerity is one of the goals of this entire thing. And Abe says, in fact, avoiding the no-deal Brexit is the wish of the entire world. Yes, it's true. And good that he says it. So this is going to be a very tempestuous year in the financial markets. But now let's also look at the kind of, two fronts. Syria and the Middle East. All right, we've got Pomposo, cavorting around the Middle East. We've also got Bolton showing up in Turkey. Bolton, he is a U.S. government official after all. He's treated like dirt. He was snubbed by Erdogan of Turkey because Bolton was trying to posture, keep up his warmonger creds, saying, we will not pull our troops out of Syria unless and until we get binding guarantees from Turkey that the Kurds will not be slaughtered. Erdogan said, that's a mistake to ask me for that, and I'm not going to talk to you, so get out. And that was the end of that. The problem with this is what the U.S. is doing is dishonorable. This is perfidy writ large, and it's crazy. The Kurds have been forced to turn to Russia. There's talk of having sending a delegation to Moscow. They have requested protection from Assad, which is okay. That's more or less normal. But then going to Moscow, not such a good thing. I rather suspect that the Kurds by now have realized what a loss this is. That the deal they're going to get in Moscow is far inferior to the one they might have gotten from a normal U.S. president. So that's Bolton. Now we've got Pomposo. Pomposo appears in Abu Dhabi, and he delivers what is thought to be a scathing refutation of what? Not of Putin, not even of Iran, but of Obama. The Obama Cairo speech of early 2009 is the target. Remember, he went to Cairo and essentially said, well, we're not all very proud of what the younger foreign policy has been. We'd like to, I don't think he ever said apologize, but we realized that this was not our greatest moment. So fine. Trying to do fence mending. Why was the fence mending necessary? Because of this neocon loony bin that was the Bush the younger administration, right? The Iraq war and the Afghan war and all that. And that's all water under the bridge. You can't undo those things. So Pomposo tells now this is at the American University in Cairo, not in the Gulf, but in Cairo. The story was filed from the Gulf. The United States has reasserted its traditional role as a force for good in this region. We've learned from our mistakes. Hey, that's an apology tour right there. Mistakes? Don the Khan doesn't make mistakes, does he? Remember, it was here in this very city, another American president stood before you. He told you that radical Islamist terrorism does not stem from ideology. He told you that 9/11 led my country to abandon its ideals in the Middle East. So this is Pomposo. I don't know what this is domestic political cover in the U.S. Back in a minute. We just want to confront all those libertarians who spent the first decade of the current century telling us all about the Constitution and how much they wanted to protect it. Well, dear friends, one of the main things in the Constitution is that the only way the federal government can spend money is by law. That is, bills that pass the House and the Senate and then are signed by the president. And without that, you're not allowed to spend a penny. So it's the Congress that does the spending. The president can either approve it or try to veto it or do something else. But the Congress spends the money. Now we've got Don saying that because he didn't get what he wants, we're going to throw all that out. That's actually quaint, we're told. And therefore, a state of emergency when the executive rules by decree, that is the big departure from the English-speaking tradition. And state of emergency, rule by decree, then commandeer money and commandeer the army under the pretext of building this wall, and always citing this non-existent strategic emergency, right? These people were in office for 2 years. They never did it, and it has not gotten worse. It's gotten better. We're told standard line is the lowest level of border crossings in 46 years, right? Would you want to run into the jurisdiction of Trump if you could avoid it? Anyway, the main danger then becomes the suspension of habeas corpus, right, that you can arrest people. Lincoln did it because he had to, as we said before, but Trump does not have to, but will he? And we know Trump's thinking. We know what he'd like to do. We know which way his heart inclines. So there we are, and that's a terrible situation. So, hey, you libertarians, right, the ones you went out there, you went from Ron Paul to Rand Paul to Trump, and now you're supporting dictatorship. Yeah, that's great, based on xenophobia. Not so good. Well, we've now got the Russian side coming back, right, coming out everywhere. Mnuchin was called to the House of Representatives by a bunch of Democratic committee chairs saying, we want to know from you why you're proposing to lift sanctions on Oleg Deripaska. Deripaska is the aluminum magnate. He owns Rusal. And again, illustrating the tremendous potential power of the United States. If we ever had a president willing to use even the claw tip of these executive powers, right? That claw tip reaches out, it gives Deripaska a nudge, and within a couple of weeks he's on the verge of bankruptcy, and he's howling, and he's yelling, and the Russian government is howling and yelling, how dare you, right? Here's the third Rome. The third Rome is going to conquer the world, but if they don't get access to the U.S. Financial markets and a few other things, then the whole damn thing deflates. It's just like a big hot air balloon. So, of course, the Trump administration, eager to please, eager to appease, came forward and said, oh, yes, we'll fix that. We'll find a way so you can even make money out of it, Deripaska. Notice, Deripaska is the guy for whom Manafort is strongly presumed to have worked. He's the guy he was willing to provide briefings on. He could accommodate. And also, certainly the issue remains open of money payments coming from Russian government into the U.S. elections of 2016. Deripaska's in the middle of all this. So Mnuchin bent over backwards to try to lift these sanctions on Rusal Aluminum and Oleg Deripaska. Why did you do that? And we saw Pelosi come out yesterday and said this was the worst secret briefing that we've ever gotten. This was evasive, and Mnuchin said, hey, what do you mean? I was there for an hour and a half. Well, Mnuchin, of course, has a very high opinion of himself, so maybe he'll be taken down a peg or two. By the way, Mnuchin never has the big picture, right? He gets lost in the details. He gets lost in the minutiae. So that's him. Veselnitskaya, the infamous Russian lawyer who talks about adoption of children when she means lifting sanctions. She speaks in a coded language. She, of course, was announced by Goldstone and confessed to Richard Engel of NBC News that she works for Yuri Chaika. She is a serving demon of Yuri Chaika, the top state prosecutor of Russia. It's the stupid provincialism of Goldstone who says the crown prosecutor. Well, he's a British. He thinks like a British. He thinks crown prosecutor. Well, it would mean an attorney general, or in this case, the state prosecutor. So Vyeselnitskaya now indicted. That's apparently got the foreign ministry in Moscow in high dudgeon. And we have Butina still in the United States, I believe incarcerated, because otherwise she'd already be gone. And this is gathering steam. We will not engage in speculation when the Mueller report or Mueller indictment or other legal actions by Mueller might be forthcoming. We would just speculate that it's likely to come all at once. It's like a nuclear strike. You don't do it piecemeal. You don't do a few today and a few tomorrow. You do it all at once, because otherwise the enemy's retaliatory strike may deprive you of your ability to follow up on your initial success. Now, the big scandal story this week is Rogozin, Dmitry Rogozin. This is the former Russian ambassador to NATO in Brussels. This is a former deputy prime minister of the Russian Federation. This is a Putinista of the First Water. And he is now the head of the Russian state-owned space agency. It's basically the privatized NASA of Russia. So he was going to come over here and have meetings, and for some reason they didn't pan out, or he might have been afraid of something. Looking at the case of Butina, looking at the case of Vyeselnitskaya, maybe he thought that there might be an indictment waiting for him somewhere. So instead he put out the statement saying that the United States is already engulfed in a second civil war. Now, few statements are so cynically calculated and so stupid, because to any patriot here of the United States to suggest another civil war, this is the most hostile, the most dastardly, the most repulsive action that one can imagine. I would hope that Rogozin is already persona non grata, just as Deripaska is. Don't let these characters into the country, right? They're about the same level, many of them, as those people in the second group of Mueller indictments, right? The ones who traveled around and set up groups and set up web pages and so forth. A lot of them are simply operatives. But to say civil war, you can imagine a signal issued to Russian networks, pro-Russian underground networks, sort of stay behind, if you like, the ones that were typically Anna Chapman, right? The Americans, the ones who were deep cover, sleeper cells, to put out the words civil war in a statement. That may be a signal, right? We've been talking about signal pieces. Generally, we've been talking about forces, like factions of the U.S. establishment, that have put out statements indicating their profound dissatisfaction with Trump. In this case, however, this may be the signal for some kind of a counterattack. So, Rogozin, we got the message. We're watching you carefully. And if you keep saying civil war, that's going to be even more unfriendly and more hostile than it was so far. Now, last thing, the U.S. forces say they're leaving Syria. Well, I'm from Missouri. I'll believe that when I see it. How many and when is the question. How many and when? If you don't see that, don't believe it. Back on Monday, back next year on World Crisis.